Today, I have the privilege of visiting with Jason Falconer, our network affiliated instructor from Waite Park, Minnesota. Welcome, Jason, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and experience with me and with our fellow network members. I'd like to introduce you to members and maybe talk a little bit about your background, which I understand includes policing, competitive shooting, and I'm interested in what led you to become a firearms instructor and to open your range. And I believe you have a retail shop too. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. I got into shooting before law enforcement. I was kind of got into the competitive shooting scene and started out there and wanted to learn more about firearms. I really didn't have anybody to. I shouldn't say I had a few people that that introduced me, but it was more kind of learn as you go. And so then I want to learn more about firearms. So there were some local NRA classes that I took, and it was basic classes, but it was this kind of my start into getting interested in instructing. So I took the NRA class, I think, like 2 or 3 times. It was the same class, but it was the only thing that we had around here, and so I took it a few times. And shortly after that, I became an instructor, went through the basic NRA and personal protection inside the home class and whatnot. And that's kind of where my firearms instruction started. I could see that the group that I was taking the classes from, they were looking for more instructors, and one thing led to another. So then I joined that group to help instruct people.
How did you get into policing, sir?
Well, that was kind of I took I started that later as a kind of a non-traditional step. I was in the corporate world, working for a utility company, and decided that I was actually advancing in the company, but I was advancing to the point where I would be in that managerial role where I might be living in different places, every 3 or 4, 5 years or something like that, and that didn't interest me. And one of my last years in college, I took some criminal justice classes, and that I had some interest in that, but being that far in college, I wasn't going to change my career. So my late 20s, I went to through what they call a career transition program at Alex Tech to get into law enforcement, and that's where I started. And I've been licensed ever since 2001. Kind of getting towards the end of my law enforcement career now, but that's how I got started in that.
Very interesting, very interesting. And I think that one thing that people will recognize your name for is 5 years ago, you were awarded the Congressional Badge of Bravery after you stopped the Crossroads Mall knife attack. What led up to that?
Well, that was just me being, I guess some say, at the right place at the right time. I was off duty at the time, actually shopping for my son's birthday present, when I was in a store looking for some things for my daughter, when I was approached by an individual that at that time I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know that there was an attack in the mall. I just know that this individual, after hearing a series of noises, when I went out into the mall to investigate, the second time there was a mass of people that were running, and in the end of that was an individual in a security uniform, and he approached me and asked me if I was a Muslim, and I stated no, and I kind of stepped back based on just his demeanor and whatnot. And that's when I noticed that he had some knives in his hand. And when I told him I was an off-duty police officer, wanted him to stop to talk to him, he took off running, and eventually I did get compliance out of him at first, but then he turned towards me, and I ended up shooting and killing him. And that's when that's when I found out about what had happened throughout the rest of the mall, that he had stabbed 10 other people. So that's where that incident led to our congressional delegates giving me that award.
Well, congratulations for coming out of that. And what I've always thought is news of that incident emphasized, or really it instructed the rest of us armed citizens, really all across the nation, just not Minnesota people, about the reasons for consistently carrying weapons for self-defense, as well as really having worked through the decision aspect of it, the mental conditioning, deciding what actions we might take if we were confronted with a threat to life. And Jason, for that, I really do thank you. We learned from what you did there, and thank you for enduring that. I think we should explore what training, both mental conditioning and weapon skills, are needed to survive what I see as the new normal in our communities these days. And tactical advantages, location. What, you're like an hour away from what has been 3 years ago, where we had the riots right in downtown Minneapolis, the epicenter of those riots. And I think that's a good example of how civil unrest influences defensive shooting classes. Did you see your student demographic, be that age, gender, economic strata, did you see a shift over the past few years due to that unpleasantness?
There was, a lot of people that were maybe even, I wouldn't say that they're anti-gun, but they weren't for guns per se. They just didn't, have an interest, realize that really you're on your own. Um, you know, Obviously as a law enforcement officer, we can't be everywhere at every given time. And so when most of what we do is react to a call, somebody calls for help and, you're responding to it, and that, it's over with most of the time, so people need to be able to take care of themselves. Our emphasis obviously is to keep people out of trouble, recognizing areas of, avoidance and situational awareness. But if it gets to that point where you have to use force or deadly force, that you're prepared for it, not only, the physical part of it where you may be involved in the fight, and the skills, the firearm skills, but what to do in the aftermath, because that, yeah, all the, I've gone to a lot of schools through 20 plus years of training and whatnot, and really there's very few that talk about what to do afterwards, and I think that's where, Jim Fleming's book came into play, and the things that he talked about was, you need to think about that portion. You know, People often think, it'll never happen to me, but then they realize that, yeah, it could happen because, if you look at, my incident or the civil unrest that we had, it could easily happen. And so a lot of, and it was all sorts of younger to our demographic was, and even some of the older generations were like, what, I think I need to at least explore this um, avenue to see if I can do it, or what are my legal rights, just because just don't know. We are living in a different time than we were, once upon a time. So.
Well, I think we are living in a different time, and I find myself using the terms the new normal. And of course, now I'm in my 60s, and we start looking at, as we age further, what kind of concerns do we have? And I guess I'm curious how you're helping those people who come to you. The classes, have you accommodated that shift in the demographic, and how do you help these people, particularly folks, make that mental conditioning decision? It's really hard for someone who hasn't thought about it before. How do you guide them through that?
In our permit to carry class, one of the things that we emphasize is the situational awareness, the physiological, psychological, the use of force, use of deadly force, and then the aftermath. We try to separate our class base. If you haven't had any shooting experience, our permit class probably isn't for you. We cover the fundamentals, but we don't take the time in that class to teach you, because we have a separate class for teaching people how to shoot. I think unfortunately a lot of people get shorted when they take permit classes, because they put all the material, or try to put all the material that they can, and teach somebody to shoot in a 4-hour time block, and that's not realistic. I just know that even our intro to handgun class, that's averages 3 hours. Sometimes you don't get through everybody, then they need to come back for more training, because they just need it, which is fine. But we want people to have that and some people when they're done with class, the permanent class, they realize, you know what, this isn't for me. I can't take that legal responsibility. I don't want to have to put myself in that situation, or, not that they're putting themselves into it, but have to react to it. They'll live with the consequences if they need to, but they just, whether it's morally or ethically, they just are struggling with that. But the other is the aftermath part of it. Knowing that they possibly could be arrested and they're going to have to fight this in court, possibly, and it's going to cost money, and those kind of things kind of are a game changer for some people. But it's good that they put the thought process through that versus just, there's the other extreme where they're I'm not worried about it, I'll deal with it when it happens, and that's the wrong attitude, I think.
Mhm. Well, and I think you're planting seeds, and even if as they leave you after those 4 hours, or maybe there's second class, those 8 hours, and they're not ready to make that decision, that seed's there. And if their circumstances change, you don't know when it's going to germinate and come to full flower, and you don't know the people whose lives you've touched by planting those seeds. And I think that's something to keep in mind. Now, Tactical Advantage also includes a gun store, is that correct?
We have an indoor range, and then we have a retail component to it. And we're basically, we're not a hunting store, so we're more the self-defense, tactical. We do business with law enforcement agencies as well, whether it's through product or training. So the whole point of Tactical Advantage was we've had a training company since 2003, but we were a mobile company. And it got harder and harder to find places to have adequate training, or we would travel somewhere and they'd say, well, we have a range, and we would show up and it was like, this isn't a range, this is a pile of dirt, type of deal. And so we started going out and vetting, the ranges ahead of time. It just got to the point where, we were thinking we need to have a place that we can train at any time, especially when it comes to low light. A lot of the ranges have conditional use permits where you have to shut down an hour before sunset, type of deal. That makes it harder for, low light or night training. So being inside, we can control the lighting. We can train anytime we want. And so that's when Tactical Advantage in early 2010, we were looking at doing this 10 years before that. But it's a big investment, it's a big commitment. So we kind of put it off, and then it looked like it was like, this is the time to do it. It's, we're not getting any younger. It'd be a good transition to out of law enforcement into something else. And so in 2013, Tactical Advantage opened, and so we do a lot of training. That's the big emphasis that we do is training, trying to get people the best knowledge and the best skills that they can. Whether it doesn't have to be for defensive situations. We run a pretty successful, well-attended league here for fun, and people like to do that as well. So that's kind of where it came about, and yeah, it's been good.
Well, it's an interesting that you had all the experience as an instructor and doing the mobile business before, because I have to expect then that when you did develop Tactical Advantage in the building that you're in, that there was some purpose-built facilities, because you knew what it was that needed to be done. It wasn't just an empty room that you put the Caswell system up in and turned into a shooting bay. And I'm sure that enhances the ability of what you can teach. Like you said, the low light work, that can be real hard on a conventional range. And I know it's a big investment.
Yeah, and we did that. We can shoot. We have it set up where we can shoot into the walls if we need to, so we can have a wider range of training. We just knew from the competition side of things and the tactical side of things that shooting just straight away wasn't going to work.
Yes.
We have portable targets that have the same ballistic backstop as our main backstop, so we can move targets around within the range. So you can shoot at different angles and things like that, just to give people more realistic, of moving and, and then with the low lights. And then we have the police strobes for when we have law enforcement in here so that they can, see their sights or their red dot with what strobing looks like, that kind of thing. So we try to make it as realistic as possible. When we do, try to do as much, simulation training as we can too. Decision based, that was something that, when I was helping the skills students with St. Cloud State, we would help the summer skills with two classes that we did was dynamic entry and decision shooting. And I think that's a big component to like my training, and my incident, how that played out is because anytime I had a chance to partake in decision-based training as an officer or simunition training, I took it just because it just, is as realistic as you can get when it comes to scenario based. And so I've got a daughter who's entering law enforcement. She starts in a couple weeks. I told her that same thing. Take advantage of all those training opportunities because I think that really is a good builder of skills and thought process when you can put yourself under, get that elevated heart rate and make those decisions, and that's when you want to do it, put yourself through that in training versus first time you have to do it is in real life.
Yeah. Well, congratulations for the second generation. That's that's really something. So you talked about the decision making, and are you able to integrate that into some training for private citizens, or is that primarily focused for police?
No, we do it for the private citizen. I would say the vast majority of what we do is for the private sector now. It's unfortunate, on the law enforcement side, I was an administrator, I was a chief before I started tactical advantage. The funds aren't there as much as you want for training. And so for me, a lot of my firearms training, whether it was for law enforcement or doing it just for my own, was on my own dime. You can't rely only on the training that your department gives you. You need to do some of that on your own. Qualifying once or twice, or even if you did it quarterly, just isn't enough time. And I hate to even use qualification because what I'm fortunate enough in the department that we're at, we don't necessarily call it qualification. We train. So we validate with a qualification because that's what everybody's expecting. But a lot of departments, they come out and they shoot a qualification and they call that training. And that's not necessarily how it should be because you have officers that struggle, and you need to spend the time working with them or to make them a better shooter. Everything that we do is, in our department training and what we do here, we require an 80% or higher when it comes to qualification, just to push people to be better. And so, I look at my incident, my hit rate was 60%, and which is above the law enforcement average of probably in the high 20s. But there's a reason why that, even I look at that still as a failure of hit percentage at 60%. So I, strive to be better. But if you don't put the time in, you can imagine what your outcome will be. So the vast majority of what we do here is private, and the private citizen, which we like. We want to have responsible gun owners out there. We want people to be educated. If people in the end decide that this isn't for me, that's okay too. It's better to figure that out in a non-stressed environment than to have a weapon of any sort that you can't use and it gets used against you or whatnot. So
Well, and I think that that's really what we as responsible citizens are looking, and we wonder, well, what should we consider so that we could be better prepared? We don't always know when this is going to come to our communities or when we may have to go to a community. I'm about 100 miles north of Portland. What if I have to go to Portland? Everybody knows Portland, Oregon is a pretty big mess. Well, I think we need to have worked those things out in advance and be ready for police defunding, like you mentioned. There's a whole lot less punishment for violent offenders these days and social unrest. If you were to sum up what you think we need to be woken up to, what the message is for those of us in the private sector, what would you tell us?
Well, unfortunately, down in the metro Twin Cities area, they voted the same people in that let them down in 2020 that back in. And so, there's a good portion of people that just won't make their way down to the Twin Cities because it is a mess. I've got friends that work in the Minneapolis Police Department, and they're taxed. They're way, well under their numbers. They do a great job, but the leaders that they have handcuff them on what they can and can't do. And that isn't gonna, until those people, until that leadership of the cities, the people running the cities change, you're gonna get more of the same. And so, I just tell people, it's one of those things where um, for me, I've always prepared for that day that, you hope that you don't have to use deadly force. A lot of people in 2020 realize, well, I need this now because of what happened. And I remind people it doesn't change it. It's better, even if tomorrow is perfect, we still want to be prepared for what may or may not happen. And I think just remind people that you got to continue with your skills. You got to, continue with that situational awareness. Things aren't getting better for the most part. We're living in a different world, like you said. It's, I think that is the new norm. And you just need to prepare yourself for what may happen and hope that it never happens.
Thank you for the wake up call, because it is awfully easy to fall back into complacency. And it's good for people to hear that from someone who's been through the fire, come out the other side. And I can't thank you enough for talking to us today, Jason. God bless you and what you're doing. And it'll be a real privilege to talk about you for network members. They'll probably be sending their wives and daughters and sons and everyone over to Tactical Advantage. And that's a good thing, because they'll get some training they need.
And we're here to help them with anything that they need. Share the knowledge is, what we like to do, and prepare people and educate people, and have a great environment for them to come and practice their skills.
That's very nice. Well, and I can see we're in your classroom and it looks clean and spiffy and well lit. So this is a far cry from the old conservation clubs that we used to go to back in the day. But hey, thank you so much for this.